Good morning. I'm going to start with a complaint. At least a third of my jokes and my call-in responses were stolen by the little lady up here going, "Ready to say stellar?" Miss Nancy ruined my sermon. I'm just going to say that right now. She asks me to preach about stellar and then steals all of my good stuff. So anyway, we are going through creation in reverse. We're down to days 2 and 4 today. Next week we'll go to day 1. Beautiful. But 2 and 4 are fun because I get to say Sky Dome multiple times. And I'll explain why, but you'll hear it as we start reading. Before I jump into our passages for today, I want to remind us when I'm reading and if you're reading up here, remember that the repetition is important. And I promise you there's a lot today because days 2 and 4 are almost identical. They're just different words describing the same thing. It doesn't make sense when I try to over-explain it, so I'm just going to read really fast. We're in Genesis, once again, chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 and 14 through 19. Here we go. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures." I read that wrong, my bad. And God said, "Let there be light in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be light in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, and the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day. Pray with me. Gracious and holy God, we don't just thank you for the beauty and majesty that is space. God, we thank you for the little children that were in these pews just this week, learning about your creation above and celebrating the great light. God, I pray that as we continue to see your beautiful creation in depth, give us more clarity than we had when we walked in. Speak more gently to us than we have ever felt before. Speak through me, and may my words be a form of worship to you. Amen. My opening joke was, if you haven't noticed, we're in space. Gosh darn it. All right, so here's the biggest thing. This week was fantastic. For those of you who don't know, my very first job in ministry was as a children's director. And so VBS has a very close place in my heart because I started 6 weeks before the very first VBS I was going to be a part of. Luckily, there was someone hired on that taught me how to do things, so it wasn't really like I did it all by myself. But Miss Nancy did so much to make this week happen, not just by this beautiful set that you can see, but by all the things you can't see. I don't know if you've noticed the little purple blobs that were jumping around and screaming at Miss Nancy when she was doing the call and response, but we had 50 of those on campus. Stuff like that is so much fun, and then when you go home and you hear silence, you're like, this is also so much fun. That's how I know I'm not ready for toddlers, you know what I mean? So, with my first full-time job in ministry, it was at a church very similar to St. John's. I grew up at the church. My mom grew up at the church. My grandma started going there when my mom was just a baby. So generationally, I was used to VBS. It was my thing. Miss Gloria was my third grade Bible teacher. So the way we broke it down is like our Bible lesson was taught in classrooms within our age range. Miss Gloria was from Jamaica. She still is from Jamaica. But she was and is the most passionate person I know about the gospel. And when I say passionate, I mean this woman she says 5 foot, I say 4'11", feisty, and wants everyone to know, I can heal you because I'm a nurse, but God can save you because he's the creator. Like, that's the feistiness we're talking about. But the thing I love, she was the third grade Bible teacher every year for decades. So when it came my time, I remember walking into her classroom. I was one of the only students that actually attended First Pres. Everyone else was like our regular VBS attendees. So no one really knew who Miss Gloria was. I did. So I'm sitting there and going, oh, Miss Gloria, yes, I know her. It's fine. As I'm getting really cocky and very confident, she slams the Bible down on the table, scares all these third graders, so of course lots of screaming ensues, and shouts, "Do you know what Bible means?" And I was like, what? So we all say like this stereotypical, like the gospel, the story of Jesus. She goes, no, it's an acronym. And I was like, what's an acronym? She goes, acronyms are words or letters that go together that mean words. So she writes on the board, Bible. She goes, basic instruction before leaving Earth. I have never forgotten that. That was over 20 years ago. And I will always laugh because I just remember how aggressively she said it. And now as an adult, knowing who Miss Gloria is, she said it with not aggression, but passion. So whenever I am at VBS, it takes everything within me, because I'm in charge of games, so I can't really scream at children, do you know what Bible means? But I can scream at them things like, when people don't get along. So the fun thing is, when you're working with kids, you need a call and response. So when they get out of hand, you can scream something at them, and they can scream back at you, and then they have to go quiet. But when you do it in a learning environment, they start retaining things. They start remembering, oh, it's not just shouting, there's a purpose behind it. You put enthusiasm behind something, and kids will remember it. Miss Gloria put enthusiasm behind what is this acronym, and here I am, still kind of quaking in my boots going, I think it's basic instruction before leaving Earth, but I could be so wrong. I have no idea. This year, of course, was stellar. I love using that word just in everyday verbiage. I think it's fun because, to be called stellar, you think of something kind of fantastical. It's something out of reach, something that is miraculous and beautiful and fun. It's not your everyday wonderful. It's bigger than that. And then when you really think about it, it's not just bigger than that, it's space. I love space. It's one of my favorite things because, similar to when we talked about the ocean, we don't know a whole lot. And especially with new telescopes coming out every few years, we're getting clearer and clearer images of what we don't know. I think one of the most fascinating things about space, we have known for decades that black holes exist, but we had never seen one. We knew that there was something that sucked things into its gravitational pull, and we have no idea where it goes, so we called it a black hole, and now we call things like that in our house, like, oh, that drawer's the black hole, we don't know where it goes. It's in our everyday language, but up until the last few years, we had never seen it. So for years, scientists are talking about it. They're explaining their mathematical equations. I have talked about math every single week, and it drives me nuts. But the thing that's beautiful is they knew, they had confidence. They're like, we don't have evidence in the sense that I can hand you a black hole, but I can give you the mathematical equation to prove that there is something that sucks everything around it in, including light. That's crazy. So when we talk about how shine Jesus light, I always think about how there is something so powerful that it absorbs light. I have no idea where it goes, and I'm very excited to find out someday. But for now, that's exciting to know that there is something bigger out there. I know we can feel too cool for school when it comes to call and responses, and I know Miss Nancy stole mine a second ago, but I want to try one more time so you can hear all 5 of the points that we've really pressed into this week with each of those students. So again, I'll say something, and then you just shout back, shine Jesus light, all right? I'll do the little point thing. Gosh, she just stole it all. When life feels dark, when people don't get along, Robin, you have to be louder. When good things happen, Hazel, your turn. When people are sad, Jillian, this one's for you. When people need help, beautiful job. My other gripe, is it shine Jesus' light or shine Jesus' light? The fourth graders could not answer me. Very frustrating. So now I, Leah, have a responsibility of telling you, how does this have anything to do with what we've talked about the last 2 weeks? Fantastic question. I asked myself that same question when I was writing the sermon. How do I tell us for conservation when it comes to space? What? So I got really, really deep into NASA's Apollo trips because I was like, all right, can't really talk about Mars because NASA doesn't really want to talk about Mars. It's kind of a sore subject. But we can talk about the moon because we have the Artemis project that's in process. I'll explain all these fancy Greek and mythological people in a second. But if you don't know, Apollo were the trips to the moon for the very first time. Pretty great. One of the things that was insane to me was, obviously we know you can still see footprints because there's no wind, there's nothing to like disturb the dust that's on the moon. So there's still evidence, not just by a flag or two, but by footprints actually in the moon. And it's estimated they're gonna be there for close to 1 million years at the rate that the moon is going, with zero movement outside of its like spinning around our spinning. But here's the other thing that is kind of a bummer. There is trash on the moon. Literal garbage that they left behind. And I was like, wait a second. We hear about that cool family photo that one of the spacewalkers left there. It's like he signed it, and it's his family's photo from that year. Another one brought like a family heirloom, like a pin, and he stuck it into like a moon rock, and it's still there. Again, we're assuming all this because we can't see it. But there is actual garbage. We can't even keep ourselves from littering on another rock. That blew my mind. I don't know why. I think it's the glamour of it all. First of all, I wasn't alive when all of this was happening. No offense. But I wasn't around, so I didn't really care. So I liked the rose-colored glasses kind of aspect. But then sitting there going, we're about to do this again with 4 more people. If we can't take care of this rock, why are we getting ready to make a settlement on another rock? Now, I'm not saying Artemis can't happen. I'm so excited and I'm so ready. It's gonna be amazing. We have our first woman and person of color that's gonna walk on the moon. I mean, what can you say? That's amazing. We are literally watching history begin. Apollo was a beautiful thing in and of itself. Artemis is going to be life-changing in and of itself because they're actually going to start building a settlement. Not because we want to live on the moon, which, I mean, who knows, but it's to get us to Mars. We're not just doing this to get to the moon. No offense, been there, done that. We're doing this to get to Mars. I know, isn't that crazy? This wind is beautiful. But one of the things that kind of blew my mind, I was like, okay, that was a couple dozen years ago that we left some trash on the moon, and hopefully we don't do it this time around. But this little guy, this is our buddy Ringo. Ringo's great. Fun fact, Ringo is not Saturn. These Bible buddies, man, I know I shouldn't gripe, but it's like, this is Halley, not Halley's Comet, but she's whatever. So with Ringo's Bible buddy video really kind of struck me this week, and it was kind of my catalyst for what we were going to focus on today, because that's what got me starting to think of trash. Ringo is talking about how Saturn's rings, obviously we think that they're solid. Very quickly we learned they're not solid. By very quickly, I mean like decades later. But what they're actually made up of are rocks, ice, and dust. Billions of pieces of that create Saturn's rings. Well, the other crazy thing is that it's not just Saturn. Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune also have rings. They're just way less defined. So we know they're there. It's just not like Saturn where you can see the haze around it when you use those super cool telescopes over at Griffith. And the thing that was nuts that Ringo said, again, this is for children. Ringo said, hey, did you know in the next 100-something-ish years, not 100 years, but like hundreds of years, Earth is going to have rings. So I was like, oh my gosh, like that's going to be crazy. But then it got depressing really quick. We aren't going to have cool space rocks and ice and dust surrounding us. We are going to have broken satellites and space junk creating our rings. And it kind of made me stop and go, oh my gosh, we are littering in space. With commercial space tourism, which is getting really big now, mind-blowing, by the way. The fact that you can spend 10 minutes out of the orbit, amazing. But how many times do we stop down here and ask ourselves, what are the repercussions of my actions? Why aren't we asking those same questions as we move vertically? What are the repercussions of making space, which really doesn't have a whole lot of regulations? That's why you can have a space race and then years later still have a semi-space race. There aren't a whole lot of regulations. Who has dibs on space? I feel like that's unfair. It's kind of like, how do you choose? So the idea that unregulated things can go up there whenever we want and everything has a lifespan, batteries die. The moon has plenty of rovers just sitting there. Mars now has rovers just sitting there. Who's going to pick that up? Unfortunately, I can't say, hey, Rooted, instead of a beach cleanup, we're going to do a moon cleanup. That's not something that we can do. So when we look at these dead satellites and we see things flying across our stratosphere, instead of saying, God didn't command me to take care of that, God commanded me to take care of everything on Earth. Fact, that is actually 100% true. We weren't told, hey, when you go up to space, be careful. But what it does say is that we are in charge of the birds of the sky. So if we are littering our sky, we are not taking care of creation. When we are getting ready to watch the second Artemis mission go up, because the first one was last year, it was super cool. Once again, I've watched all this. I love this. This isn't something like me going, don't go to space. That's wrong. It's me saying how we go to space is important, and how we come back from space is also important. They will be up there for 30 days total, 7 days on the moon. Think of how much we can do in 7 days. The geologist that's going up, she is incredible. She is so fun. She is so smart. She's not that much older than me, which makes me feel real funky inside, but really proud of her at the same time. It's like that dichotomy. But to know that someone of my generation is going up and is going to be leading this next generation of moonscape people is beautiful. And I don't mean to sound curmudgeon-y and go like, don't do that, that's ridiculous. But when we have 20 billion galaxies estimated, we have to recognize the impact we are making. It's not just to the Milky Way. It's not just to Earth's orbit, because we want to go farther. And I think, and I truly, at the core of myself, I have a friend whose dad worked at JPL and was one of the lead engineers on the Mars rover. That man loves space. But he doesn't just love space, he loves the fact that he gets to explore God's creation in a way other people cannot. He's in top secret things, and he comes home, and Sarah's like, it's annoying because he's all giddy, and he can't talk about it, and he won't. But he's just like, oh, Sarah, it's so good. God is so big. I want us to be excited. We need to be excited. But when we have a hard time of caring for the call we have on this rock, how much more intentional do we need to be on our call outside of this rock? I don't believe for a second that our call to tend to creation is as simple as care for what's here, ignore what's up there. I say this because imagine hundreds of years from now, we have that beautiful ring that we're being warned about, and God takes Abram out of his space tent and goes, Abram, look at the sky. Count the dead satellites and the broken space junk. If you can count it, that will be your generations. Like, that doesn't make any sense. God used the stars as a way of showing Abraham what his promise meant. Space junk had nothing to do with that. This isn't our first walk on the moon, but it's our first time experiencing people going to space for funsies. I am a smidge jealous that they get to go to space for funsies. I want that to be very clear. But being mindful of how we enter these places and how we exit these places, I want us to feel a little bit small. Have you guys ever seen, it's a diagram of Earth in comparison to, then it's usually like Saturn, Jupiter, the sun, the sun's sun, and other galaxies. And very, very quickly, we vanish. Like within 4 or 5 comparisons, Earth, not us like as in me standing here, Earth with 8.1 billion people on it completely vanishes. And yet God looks at us and says, hey, you need to care for this galaxy for me. I'm going to keep creating, and there's all stuff like, yay, but I want you to focus. This galaxy is yours to care for. Again, we are not a dictatorship, we have dominion. We do not create our own light. We're like the moon. Got a little bit of junk, trying to clean out every once in a while, trying to get a refresh, restart, and it feels like it's stagnant. And then, all of a sudden, we rotate. And the sun is what sources our light. We don't create our own. When people, it always makes me laugh, especially when you're out with students, and people will look at our students and go, you are so joyful. And they don't know what we're doing. They just think, obviously, I am a woman with a gaggle of teenagers, because that's what women in their 20s do, is adopt teenagers. So they don't ask questions, and they just go, your kids are so joyful. And I'm like, thank you. Did you hear that? Be joyful. It's not that they are joyful, but they know what their source of joy comes from. The stranger may not. But when we talk about something as cheesy and debatable as shine Jesus light, which sounds a little silly, but shine Jesus' light feels better in my little heart, so I'm going to say that one. When we shine Jesus' light, we share joy, we share compassion, we are caring, not just of ourselves, but of the things around us, the things above us, the things below us. The sky dome, I love that word, the sky dome that God talks about is under our dominion. So if you're sitting here going like, Leah, there's not a whole lot I can do in the space department. That's not my thing. Great, but you can do it within this atmosphere. In order to make space junk, it has to leave our atmosphere. These are not dumb people we're working with. They are incredibly smart, and unfortunately, they love math. It's okay. We love them anyway. We will make mistakes as we shine Jesus' light. But at the end of the day, we need to remember where our source comes from. It's very easy to get cocky and say that we shine Jesus' light. And then slowly it turns into, I shine light. Forgetting that although, yes, you provide the lesser light at night, the only reason you're able to do that is because of the main light source that comes during the day. And also, when we are gone and our time comes to be with the Lord, there are stars to light the night anyway. Our next generation is coming up faster than we'd like to accept. There were 50 of them on campus today. Not today, holy moly. This week. When we are shining Jesus' light, we need to remember there are stars reflecting back at us, and we have to tend to them as well. We have to do the silly call and responses. We have to do the funny little games that you're like, this is the most boring game I have ever played in my life, but you really like it, so let's keep going. You stand in the sun. Also, I'm just depicting my week. You stand in the sun and go, I am sweating like no other. And then kids come and dump ice water on you, and you go, didn't want that. Thank you. Much obliged. But when I look at them, I was that kid. If it wasn't for Miss Gloria's passion, I wouldn't have had a funny antidote to tell you at the beginning of this sermon. I would have just been griping about the fact that Miss Nancy stole all of my jokes, which is still true. We live in a beautiful world created by a beautiful God. And we continue to be awed and amazed at the fact that God made so much more than just this little rock. And this rock rocks, or it's stellar. As we go into a time of silent meditation, please don't hate on space people. They're doing great. But I want us to remember we have more than just this rock to care for now. We're adding to our plate. We're choosing this. And that's okay. But how do we as Christians continue to push and call for better and more resourceful ways of caring so that we don't have space junk surrounding our planet in the next couple hundred years? Join me in a silent meditation. Gracious and holy God, we thank you for the 200 billion galaxies outside of our own. We thank you for the minds that you created to help us discover this. We thank you for the minds and the tenacity to push further and to discover more, to come home giddy and joyful at seeing your creation in ways most humans don't get to. God, as we live in a time that is unique and beautiful and exciting, give us the words and guidance to do so properly. May we make an impact that is great for all of humankind, but God, may it be one that is gentle and reflective of you more and more. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to sing, okay, thanks, Donna. I was like, we're going to sing our closing hymn, which is going to be out of our hymnal number 10.